So today we're going to talk about a little bit more of Spanish colonization. So we have the conquistadors. Uh, yeah, so here on the picture you can see the conquistadores. We have Ponce de Leon. Actually, the first one was Columbus. Then mm, Ponce de Leon and Balboa, which found Panama. Then Cortez, Hernan Cortez. Then we have De Soto, Onate, and before Onate, Pizarro. Right. All right. Well, these conquistadors, they were from Spain, and after Columbus, the secret was out. There are more things on other than Europe, and so they started conquering. And the conquistadores, they were in search of three G's: gold, glory for themselves or for their nation, and a bit of God. They wanted to convert people to Christianism, Catholicism, actually. And so 1942, we have the arrival of Columbus. In 1494, we have the Treaty of Tordesillas, which was a treaty between Portugal and Spain, so that half of the world's riches would be Spain's and the other half would be Portugal's, right? And there is a very cool book called Azteca from Gary Jennings, and he talks about a novel, right, about the Aztecs, and so he talks about Hernan Cortez. He was kind of like a bastard, not a bastard, but the king didn't allow him to go out in a he wasn't a conquistador. He just got out, and for his luck, he found Mexico. So yeah, Hernan Cortez, 1519. Oh, and so yeah, he landed in Veracruz, and it's very cool in the book. They say that the Aztecs, right? They said people came in giant floating houses, and they had spears that sounded like thunder and flashed like lightning. It was an arquebus or a rifle, and they also had cannons, and they had war dogs. They say wolves, and so at first, Moctezuma, which was the king at that time, he was very pacific with the Spanish, and so Hernan Cortez, he continued through this green line over here, gathering people, because here in Tenochtitlan, which is today Mexico, was the capital, and it had 200 to 300,000 people, and the king was not a good ruler, and so the other cities didn't like, and so the Spanish started aligning with these other cities. And yeah, here Coatepec, all of these are famous ones, and they came here to Tenochtitlan. And first Moctezuma was Pacific, right? But then the people started questioning, saying that is this really Moctezuma our king? Is he strong enough to take the Spanish out? And because of that pressure, he tried, but he triggered a war, and the Spanish had more technology. And also they died a lot because of smallpox and other common flus. And it's very cool in the book. It says, right, that they fought, but they had like obsidian things, which is a rock, and the other had iron. And what they did is that cut off the ringing the ropes. Actually, the Tenochtitlan in the middle is in the middle of a lake, and there were bridges, but those swinging bridges, not swinging bridges, hanging bridges, and they cut off the bridges so that the Spanish couldn't come in, and they did a lot of damage, but they couldn't resist to the cannons, so that's how Tenochtitlan crumbled down, was because of the cannons. And so we have the encomiendas and the encomendadores, which were people under the Spanish lords that had power over they were also Spanish, had power over the Aztecs. And it was just another name for slavery. They had a labor system, which was a feudalism and a slavery. So these Spanish that were under the Spanish lords would have power over Native Americans and would have a few of the products like goats or any agricultural product. And the slaves would have given to them Christianization and also protection. And since the Spanish came in until 16,000, the population decreased from 20 million to 2 million. And people weren't liking that. So in 1680, there was a revolt, a Pueblo revolt, headed by Popey, which is also called Popey's Rebellion. And so they did it more subtly, being outwardly practicing Christianity, but inside they were their religion, and that is called syncretism. And so they revolted and killed priests, burned down churches, you made their kivas, and they were successful. They could kick the Spanish out. But 50 years later, the Spanish came back, but they were in a more quote unquote good way. It was not with arms, right? And also there was, once the Spanish settled, there was the casta system, which is a racial caste. It was different. It was a racial ranking. The lower you were, less legal rights you have. And so the purest were the Spanish, right? The criollos. And so when a criollo married an Indian, we would have a mestizo. If a mestizo married an española, would have a castizo. If a castizo, and so on, right? Then we have Espanol, mulatto, lobo, and all of that, Chino, Morisco. And so that people could identify themselves. It's called a casta painting. And so also we'll compare European with Native American cultures. So here are the Algonquins, and in the other picture is the landing of Columbus. And so, well, the Native Americans, so we have land, property, and trade, gender roles, and religion. The Native Americans, they had hunting ranges and they had temporary use of land. So I could have a plot of land and use it for my family, for example. But if you needed food, you could also plant and in the same place as I'm planting. So it's not mine, it's something that was borrowed. And they had a communal thought. And the European actually thought that the land was its own, so they fenced off. So the Americans, when the Native Americans, when the Europeans landed, they let the Europeans planted in their place. But then once the Europeans settled, they put fences on their land. So why can we land our land, but why can't you borrow your land? I mean, it's not yours. And in property, trade was actually a ceremony, and the richest of them all would be the one that gave gifts to everyone. It was a source of rich, but to the others. And people that had high status would give a lot of gifts. And that's like foolish if you think in today's, like, if you're rich, you accumulate a lot of wealth, and that leads you to high status. And so the Native Americans thought that the Europeans were selfish also. Gender roles, the men hunted, fished, and made war. And because of that, the women would be at home. So they would farm, have greater freedom. They could divorce and do whatever they wanted. And also they had more influence in consuls and Congress, no, not Congress, in councils. And also it was matrilineal. That means the woman, the child was uh, part of the mother's family, and when they married, the guy would go to the woman's house, like they would leave. Yeah, he would move to the woman's house, and not the woman to his house. Like it's today, right? Men led households, the Europeans, right, and farmed and made war, and women had fewer rights and did household labor. So that's a difference. And in religion, they had a great creator, and they also had nature spirits, and it was non-exclusive. While with Christianity, there is one God, Christian God, and also they had the saints in the Catholicism, and it's exclusive. But also there are a few helpful aspects, like for example, uh, metal implements for cooking, guns and horses. And also here is a generalization. Not all of Europeans and all of Native Americans were like this, but the majority. And also they could trade for furs and allies in war, the Europeans, and that's what we're gonna talk. The French and Dutch colonizations are very different from the Spanish because the goals are different. So they had different types of settlement. And also the relationships were different with the Native Americans. And so this is Spain, the green one. And the magenta is New France, and the orange is New Netherlands. And they were sitting by St. Lawrence and St. Hudson. And whereas New Amsterdam was New Amsterdam, now is New York City. And so the French, nah, the French and the Dutch, they had fewer settlers. Why? Because they lived in terms of the Native Americans. They didn't come in to subjugate the Native Americans. They paid for the Native Americans to hunt, and with that pelt that they have, they could make these fancy hats over here. They could sell to Europe. So they were making more money and not enslaving or forcing them. Whilst the Spanish had to, with guns, force their labor. And so what they did is that they gave gifts, they made intermarriage so that they were part of family, and they also allied in war with them. And so here's a French, actually Belgium, Netherlands map. They were mainly for trades, and New Amsterdam, which is New York, was a company town that was led by Dutch West India Company. And so here we have the area that have turkey, monkeys. No, these are beavers, I guess. Here we have foxes and pairs, but also they have here the cities. And so they were allies, and they were actually they were trying to be a part of the Native Americans. So it was a smoother transaction. It was different with the Spaniards, uh, Spanish people. And yeah, so that was the difference between the French and the Dutch. Ones were more pacific, whilst others were more violent.